Good morning. We're on a prevent plant late planting decisions webinar here. So that's what we should be doing. You have Todd Hubbs here, and he's going to provide a bit of a market outlook. Jonathan is going to provide a policy update, and then I'll talk about soybean decisions. Our topics for today will again be market outlook, soybeans, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the prevent plant decision. We're going to go into a bit more detail of cover crops, and then we'll cover the MFP program. And we really don't know a lot more from last week, and we'll give you as much detail as we can about the ad hoc disaster assistance program. Just to begin this, though, if you do have a prevent plant issue, you should probably be already in contact with your crop insurance agent. If not, do so pretty quickly. And we would note that as we go through these discussions, one of the bigger things that we're going to need to do is determine the eligible acres for prevent plant, and there will be values for both corn and soybeans. If you're going to take prevent plant, there has to be some also proof of intention to plant, and that could be seed receipts, that could be field maps. Any one of a number of things will satisfy that requirement. We would also suggest that you talk to Farm Service Agency, and if you have prevent plant acres, you will complete CC 576. The deadlines for doing that actually is 15 days after the final plant date, so that's coming up for corn and soybean, or corn in particular. If you're doing prevent or claim on corn, those FSA will accept those crop insurance records, and Illinois FSA has extended the deadline if you have no insurance or NAP to the acreage reporting date, which will be July 15th for corn and soybeans. It's reasonably important to get those turned in, even if you don't have insurance, because the ad hoc disaster assistance could make payments based on those numbers. So if you want to report those numbers to FSA if you don't have insurance, those could come into play into acreage update if that would ever happen. Where am I at here?
Lose it?
Yeah, we're losing the.
Just hit the arrow.
There you go. All right, there we go.
Back.
All right. If you wouldn't mind, just do a poll here. In your area, how much of corn is prevented plant? So just give us a feel for how much you think is prevented plant in your area. So as you're doing this poll, again, we'll get Todd up here giving us a market update here pretty quick. So if you could take a couple, just do our poll. We'll give you the results here in a minute, which these results probably tell you more about where you're at than
an indication of where your area is, right?
Right.
how little has been able to get in some parts. So as we go east.
So here's our results, and I'm gonna. Oh, there's my. Got it. Oh, there we are. Here we're going to show you the results. Maybe
They're up.
They're up there. So not much is 17%. Less than 20% of the acres, 44%, between 20 and 50%, 33%, and there's some in Northwest Ohio, Northern Illinois, and maybe Indiana there. So that'll give you a feel. This is a map that was produced by Grow Intelligence that indicates where they think the risk of prevent plant acres on corn is at. This matches my expectations of where they're at. We have that big area in South Dakota and Nebraska, then here in northern Illinois through northern Indiana and Ohio. Again, Todd might mention this, but But you're thinking, what, 10 million acres reasonable for corn prevent plant this year?
I think that, yes. I think that could very well be the case. If you wanted to put a range around it, I'd say 9 to 12, but, I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
And here is the same map for soybeans. Again, you're seeing roughly the same areas with prevent plant risk, and that, in my opinion, prevent plant risk on corn or soybeans got much higher this past weekend when we saw a lot of rains, particularly in northern Illinois, Indiana, and that big area in Ohio.
Yeah, Northwest Ohio is really, really taking a tough spring there.
So that'll give you a feel for and where a lot of those acres for prevent plant will be. And Todd,
Take it away, Hub.
Good morning. So today I'm going to talk about soybeans and corn a bit. What you're seeing in this slide is the USDA's current 18-19 projection in the first column, and then how I match up with them in the second column on the current marketing year. I'm there with them. I think you could see that export number go down a little bit depending on what China does with the sales they have outstanding, but we're basically on pace for those right now, which has us at a 27.2% stocks to use ratio, which is incredible. And we're carrying out over 1 billion bushels, so they could grow some more. I think what most people are really concerned about right now is the 1920 crop year. USDA's current forecast, they didn't change the acreage from the March prospective planning. They've still got their yield at 49.4. And then they've got these consumption numbers, about 2.115 billion bushels of crush and 1.95 billion bushels of export, which is a bit of a head scratcher to me based on the current trade environment. But let's just say they're right. They've got about 4.2 billion bushels of use. What you're seeing in the last two columns, the first column, where I'm saying there's no acreage change from the March prospective plannings report, I've started fading the yield in soybeans a little bit, and it could get stronger. We, like Gary was saying earlier, the longer this goes on, the longer the rain's happening in the eastern corn belt. We're talking some prime soybean acres in Illinois and Indiana. I think some yield will come off of this projection the next time USDA does a WASDE report. But right now where I sit, I'm a little bit lower on exports. I think the crush is looking good, particularly if the biodiesel credit goes through like the House is batting around right now. And then there's an idea of a 2 million acre gain. Now, I'm with Gary on this. I'm starting to get concerned that we might lose some soybean acres this year due to prevent plant, weather permitting. I think farmers would probably plant soybeans due to the market facilitation payment, but this has been just an incredible spring, particularly in the eastern corn belt. So as you can see on the last two columns, my prices for 1920 are substantially lower than what we're seeing currently in the futures market. So I want to talk about this a little bit, and I'm going to have to walk you through this the way I'm thinking about it. So let me just assume here that the USDA's consumption scenarios are correct. Let's just assume that. In the bottom, you have the average farm price. What I've done is calculated what the futures market currently has out over the 1920 marketing year, included basis, my expected basis, and some marketing weights. And right now, as of yesterday afternoon, my estimate was the futures market was pricing soybeans at $9.05 cash. Everybody with me on that one? So in my opinion, to get that kind of price, you need about an 11% stocks to use. Under the USDA's consumption scenario, that would mean ending stocks at 465 million bushels, thereabout. We could have a little bit of wiggle room. It could be 500 million, but that's my base assumption. So to get there, we would need a supply of about 4.66 billion bushels. I'm going to assume that beginning stocks don't grow anymore and that import number is the same. So what I'm saying is, how could we get to 465 million bushels of ending stocks? I've got some yield scenarios up there, 43, 45, 47, 48 bushels an acre nationally. And I just sort of say, if we're going to get to 4.66 billion bushels, we need production giving those beginning stocks and imports of 3.57 billion bushels. That's the same for all these scenarios. So when we include these different yields in, I'm basically trying to back out what's the market currently pricing this at? What yield are they at? And what kind of acreage would we have to see go out of the soybean crop to get that kind of ending stocks? So what you're seeing here is if we did 43 bushels an acre, we actually don't need to lose that many acres of soybeans to merit that 905. Is it feasible to do 43? I want to remind everybody, when you look at the data over the long term, we rarely have gone 3 bushels outside of trend. It rarely happens. To do 43, that would be 6+ bushels outside of trend. Now, this is a strange year, and we could do it. If we hit 45 bushels an acre, you're looking at about a 4.5 million acre reduction. If we did 47 bushels an acre, you're looking at 7.9 million acres. And if we do 48 bushels an acre, you're looking at 9.5 million acres under my scenarios here to hit that 465 ending stock. So is the market pricing lower acres and lower yield? I think they're putting a weather premium in the market. But for marketing soybeans, you have to ask yourself, will we really lose 5 million acres of soybeans? And what kind of yield do you think we're at? Maybe the soybean market has more room to run, and we might lose some acres. And I'm sort of at the point where I think it might be a little bit of a wash with switching and prevent plant. So my first scenario on the previous slide. But when we're at these kind of 905 prices, it's going to take a significant supply hit for us to get and sustain those prices through 1920. So I'd like for you to think about that when you're marketing soybeans this year. And I do understand not wanting to sell them in cash right now because you're not sure at all what kind of yield you're going to get. This goes for corn and soybeans as well. This is where paper might be a handy way to hedge some of your production and price risk moving into 1920. Corn balance sheet. The first column there is the USDA's current forecast for 18-19. Mine is right next to him. The only place I really differ is the feed and residual number, and we'll find out with the June stocks report how feed and residual is progressing through the year. I think the USDA is probably overestimated a little bit based on their, I think, low yield projection for last year's crop. We're going to carry out around 2.2 billion bushels, no matter how you slice it. So when we think about 1920, here's where the big questions are. USDA lowered planted acreage 3 million in the June WASDE, and they lowered yield 10 bushels an acre. And that's putting us getting somewhat tight in corn use if you consider the supply relative to the consumption. USDA's got about 14.25 billion bushels of consumption. I'm fine with most of those numbers. I'm a little bit different on feed and residual and exports and actually ethanol if you just took their supply scenario. I don't think that's the supply scenario. So what you're seeing in the fourth column, Gary, could you point to that for me, please? When I say forecast a 7 million acre loss, that's 7 million acres.
Oops.
That's 7 million additional acres on top of the USDA's 3 million acres. So that would be 10 million in general from the March Prospective Plantings report. I think this is feasible. I also think it's reasonable. We'll see. We will not know in the June acres report. There's a lot of uncertainty when the survey went out about corn planting. I personally think the June acres report will be 5 to 7 million acres lower than the March Prospective Planting. But we probably won't know till the FSA produces their numbers in October for sure where we're sitting. Now, maybe the crop insurance agents will have some deep knowledge about how many PP acres went in. And if any of them want to send me that data, I would be happy to take it in real time. Under those kind of scenarios, we get up around $5 corn, anywhere close, we're going to start seeing rationing. I think feed and residual will be lower. Of course, the crop's much smaller. The residual part goes down. I think ethanol will be lower. I don't think we'll price, unless ethanol prices go up quite a lot, I don't think we'll price ethanol out of the blend. It's exports that I'm worried about. We always see corn exports mainly be the first place that rationing starts, and we could see that be even more significant than what we're seeing here. So in my base case scenario, if we lose 10 million acres at a 166, I will say this, and I know people are asking me a lot about yield. I'm fine with the USDA's 166. I think the best we can do this year would be a 170. The best. I mean, we've planted a bunch of the crop in some pretty poor conditions very, very late. I think on the lower end, this thing could get ugly. We could, depending on what kind of summer weather we have. If you pay me down right now, I'd probably say 166 fine. We could see a little bit lower than that. The other scenario where I say we have a 10 million acre loss, that would be 13 million acres above the March prospective plantings report. If we lose that amount of acres and the kind of yield we're looking at, it's really hard to forecast where the price will be because things get non-linear in a hurry. And the rationing could be severe, but I'm putting that at about a 550 range. So appreciate your time. I'll turn it over.
All right, now we're going to switch to the prevent plant decisions on soybeans. And again, if we're running this poll now, if you wouldn't mind taking our poll, the soybean decision, we're going to be focusing on that soybean decisions on soybeans intended acres. So we still have the possibility of planting soybeans on our corn prevent land after the final plant period, or the late plant period, which will be after next week. So we're not looking at that decision now. We're going to be looking at those decisions relative to soybean. You have a soybean acre and you're going to either do a prevent plant or not. Your polling says 43% of you say that not much of the soybean acres will be a prevent plant. 43% said less than 20%, 11% between 20 and 50%, and over 50%, 2% of you said that number. Just as a reminder, our final plant dates there are on the right. June 15th for Northern Illinois, so we're already in the prevent plant period in Northern Illinois, and then for Southern and Central Illinois, we begin that prevent plant period late final plant date is tomorrow, and then we'll begin the late planting period on Friday. So we're there. So after tomorrow, in Central and Southern Illinois, we can take a prevent plant payment, and again during the final or the late plant period, which runs for 25 days for soybeans, we'll be seeing a 1% decline in our crop insurance guarantee. And then after that, a 60% guarantee. Again, we're going to look at those acres intended for soybeans, and we're going to assume that you don't plant corn on them anymore. So you're done planting corn, and you can take a prevent plant payment for either soybeans or plant those soybeans. As a note here, if we're just looking at our projections returns without insurance, about June 21st, the lines switch and soybeans become more profitable than corn. And we're running that right now at a $4.25 corn price, $9 soybean price. So we're getting to the point, even without insurance, we would be planting soybeans rather than corn. So one item to note, and there may be a temptation, maybe not anymore, but if we have a corn prevent plant acre that can be going into prevent plant on corn, we could still plant that to soybeans if we so choose. The prevent plant payment on the corn would then go away. When we do comparisons here, particularly at high RP coverage levels, and RP or with the combo product, a high coverage level, we don't see soybeans planting. In my example here, the soybean planting has a $80 lower return at a $50 yield and an $8.50 price. So you can lower those yields some, and it's just hard to see soybean planting coming in and being more profitable than taking a corn prevent planting payment. We continually get those questions about what yields will look like if you prevent plant. Here's just some data that you may or may not find useful. I would tell you right now that, we have different conditions. Many people are putting in soybeans really in poor conditions fields, so these may not be applicable. But this is in Southern Illinois, and from 2012 to 2018, the final column gives the average. 51 bushel yield was in Southern Illinois, the average over that period, 38 for double crop. The double crop was 73% of the full season. This was some work that was published on Farmdoc Daily based on Emerson Nafsinger's work, that by June 20th, we get 72% of the maximum yield. So 25 to 30% loss seems like a reasonable expectation.
Right. And we're looking at between a quarter and a third of the soybean crop going in as if it's double crop this year. Yeah. And so that's a big deal.
And the other thing about this is that they can get much worse. Like, look at 2012, we had 41%. So it's, that's 70, 72, 73% is sort of the average there. I'm going to give a situation just to make that comparison. So I'm going to take a 50 bushel trend adjusted APH yield, 80% RP policy. Our prevent plant payment in that case would be $229, which is 60% of our guarantee. And if we subtract subtract off some cost over there, and I got $40 of cost, we got $189 of prevent plant return. So for $40 would include the payment and the and our putting in weed control and that sort of thing, and the crop insurance premium. So we're looking at $189 prevent plant net return. So if we have $189 prevent plant return, that's certain. It will not impact our APH because we're not planting. What do we need to get to make planting worthwhile? Over on the right, you'll see we estimate that you have to have $449 of revenue from soybean sales to make planting soybeans worthwhile. That $449 is your $189 prevent plant payment plus $260 of soybean costs. So we're saying we need that revenue just to have the same return as prevent plant soybeans. We subtract $50 of MFP payment, which is our guess. Jonathan Coppess says that's going to be highly accurate, right? Or something like that.
Oh, sure. Why not?
So we're putting in $50 of MFP payments here. And that's important to note, because if we were not putting any MFP payments, you wouldn't, our economics here would be saying that you shouldn't be planting. So if you get a 50 bushel APH or a 50 bushel yield, you'd need an $8 break even cash price, 38 bushel per acre yield, which would be sort of that 28% decline. You need a $10.50 price. So if you're looking at sort of those normal levels, you would need a $10.50 cash price to break even, given that we have a 28% decline.
And so we're drifting towards that $10.50 break even. If you're trying to make that decision now on soybeans, you're drifting pretty quickly to that number.
Yeah. So that's...
Are we at 905?
Yeah. There's been some market commentators talking about above $10 soybeans. For that to happen, we're going to have to lose a lot of acres, in my opinion.
Yeah. So this, just to give you a feel for what... This slide just shows different actual yields, different harvest price, and we're just using a 30-cent basis here, which is pretty maybe a little bit light right now. But just to give you a feel, if you have those cash prices, those actual yields, those numbers on there are net return from planting, and the red ones are when you get above it. So get above the prevent plant payment, and you can see at those lower yields, you need that $10.50 sort of price. This is done one day after the final plant date. So this is like in central and southern Illinois, Friday. If you're in northern Illinois, this would have been Sunday. So we're already past this. For northern Illinois, I'm going to do another slide with 7 days after it. So you got the one at the top and the one at the bottom, 7 days after. And what's happened, you'll notice here that at those lower actual yields and prices, we get lower payments, and they went down about $15-20 per acre. And what's happening there is your crop insurance guarantee is going down, so you're getting less payments. So as we stretch this out, you're gonna, if you get and expect any sort of yields, it's just sort of that possibility of getting those higher returns just goes away. So I guess the net result of this is I would just say that it's pretty touch and go right now. If you plant or take the prevent plant payment, you got to be hoping for some net return here. I got some calculation here that just shows the net return at the minimum. We did this last week as well. If you just want to see what sort of risk you have planting, this will be a way of looking at it. Again, just to summarize here, if I'm looking at the prevent plant payment or prevent plant take soybeans decisions, it's touch and go right now. If we see some price increases, maybe we get it, but the later on we get into this period, the less and less that taking those planting soybeans seems to be advisable. We've gotten a number of questions about cover crops, so I'm just going to give a brief rundown of cover crops and some of the crop insurance and MFP considerations associated with this. Again, there's some things that we don't know. So, but here are our little poll here. Do you expect prevent plant acres to be planted to cover crops? So if you wouldn't mind taking our poll here, we'll see what you all think is going to be planted to cover crops. And as you're taking this poll, again, we got some things that are still up in the air as far as policy wise. The crop insurance rules are pretty set in stone. So
yeah, and crop insurance, we know fairly well how that's going to play out, and that's fairly consistent and has been. With on the other side of the policy with USDA's MF market facilitation program payment, that's kind of thrown a curve into some of the usual policy aspects, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Gary, you want to go over our poll results?
A third. Almost exactly.
How about that?
Not many. A third of you thought less than 50%, and a third of you thought over 50%. Just to reiterate, summary of crop insurance rules: 100% of the prevent plant payment will be received if you plant a cover crop and that cover crop is not harvested, hayed, or grazed. If you're not going to harvest or hay or graze that cover crop, you really don't have a concern with reducing your prevent plant payment. If you come into those considerations where you're doing it, you will get concerned.
And I want to jump in there because this is going to be a moment. This is one of those conflicting aspects potentially with the MFP program. So keep in mind the difference between what crop insurance requires and what we are hearing thus far on this MFP program. And, I think our advice generally would be to pay close attention to the crop insurance rules and
Yep.
before you make some decisions on this, but just keep this first bullet in mind as we get into the MFP program comments.
All right, you can use soybeans as a cover crop on a corn prevent plant acre. So you can do that. I would stress to you, if you do that, you got to be really. A soybean acre and a cover crop looks a lot like a soybean acre in soybeans. So there's going to be some adjusting, counting concerns. If you do that, there are requirements for minimum that the soybeans has a minimum rate. What that is sort of hard to say. You cannot use soybeans as a cover crop on a soybean prevent plant acre because that's planting soybeans. So so you can use soybeans as a cover crop. Now, if a cover crop is planted before the final plant date, and this could be the case where you have a cover crop that you established last year and nothing went into it. You will get 100% of the prevent planting payment if you could have hay or grazed that before the final plant date. So you got 2 more days for soybeans in central and southern Illinois. You can get 100% if you hay or graze it after November 1, or you don't do any hay or grazing. You would get 35% of the prevent plant payment if you hayed it or grazed it between now or final plant date November 1, and no payment if you harvest it. So if you plant that cover crop during the late planting period, again, if you don't do haying or grazing ever, or you hay or graze it after November 1, you'll get 100% of the prevent plant payment. No prevent plant payment if hay or grazed before November 1. So the date does matter if you're haying or grazing it when you planted it. And if you plant it after the late planting period, you get all the prevent plant payment. If you don't hay or graze it, or you hay or graze it after November 1. If you hay or graze it before November 1 or harvest it, you can get 35% of the prevent plant payment. And this would be the case of they're treating it like a second crop. So that's why you get 35%. Some discussion of relaxing the haying or grazing requirements for the cover crop, so you could do it before November 1. Just look at that has not happened. So
Right.
It has not happened. So there is that possibility, but it has not happened. And here's our next one, the market facilitation program. You can get a minimum market facilitation program payment if the cover crop has the potential to be harvested. We don't have the definition of what minimal is, or no definition of what
Potential to be harvested. Yeah.
And by the way, this does not change the crop insurance rules. So MFP rules are separate from the crop insurance rules.
Yeah, and I would add to that, right? The crop insurance rules are longstanding and in place. This MFP program, you have to keep in mind, is something that USDA has created on its own, which means it doesn't have the same statutory components that the crop insurance program does. So if you are betting on one of these sides or the other, I would not bet against the crop insurance rules at this point. That's just, you got to proceed with caution on that. We would hate for somebody to get crossways on that because they were betting on something out of this MFP program that may or may not be, the USDA may or may not be able to do. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we talk about the MFP program.
Which is where we're going.
Oh my goodness, we teed that up perfect, Gary.
And we got another poll for you. So, all right. So our poll this time, you tell us what you think the MFP payment is going to be per acre. Remember, and you can do this for your county or where your county you're located in. There's going to be a single per acre MFP payment.
You tell us. What do you think it's going to be?
Yeah. We'll use your number. We'll use your number in our.
That's right. The winning guess will then become the next estimate in your calculations, Gary.
So, we're going to give you.
Although we gave it away, he already said $50. We'll see how much people are paying attention to your initial guess.
All right. So here's your guesses: 10% less than $20 per acre. 44% 20 to 40, 42% between 40 and 60, and then 2% thought more than that.
There's some optimists out there.
All right, it's all yours, John.
We'll click back in. Okay, so let's do the policy update and just some quick background information. I pulled out the 2018 planted acres that NASS reported for all the major crops that are covered under the latest MFP announcement, which is basically all the covered commodities from the Farm Bill Title I programs plus hay, alfalfa. And just a note, NS, if you total them up, was about 266.5 million acres planted in 2018. And just to reiterate, a couple of nice maps. This one from the Washington Post about the wet spring, and this one from NOAA with the number of rain days as of June 15th. So again, just another reiteration of the challenging spring that we're in and the impacts that might have. So we've teed up the MFP program, the Market Facilitation Program payments. Where once again, the M still stands for mystery because we still do not have any further detail on what USDA is going to do with this. We know it was announced on May 23rd, and the last official update we've gotten was June 10th. What we do know from that last official update is you must plant a crop for harvest. It has to be marketed to be eligible. And so this goes to the earlier point. What USDA is saying is that because they have created this program out of long-standing, and by long-standing I mean 1948, Commodity Credit Corporation Authority, that is a market facilitation program, which means it can only be made on marketable commodities. So this is sort of the box that USDA is in with this announcement, and the timing of this announcement is that they are not designing this program payment for anything other than a marketable commodity. And so what the restrictions are on the use of CCC funds in this way means you've got to have a marketable commodity, which they're saying means you have to plant a crop that you intend to harvest in order to get this payment. So that is where some of the complication comes in. As Gary mentioned, we know from their announcements that there's going to be one county rate. They just haven't told us what it's going to be. It's going to be for all the acres planted in that county, regardless of the crop. So there is no crop by crop payment, as we saw last time when we had soybeans get one price and corn get a whopping penny. That will not be the case. This will be a single per acre rate for the entire county. And we know, based on what USDA has said, is that they will spend $14.5 billion for these Title I commodities and alfalfa planted this year.
By the way, that one county rate will vary by county.
That county rate will vary by county. So it's going now. This is where it sort of gets odd, and we'll come back to that. They are stating, at least the initial announcement was, they were going to do some sort of analysis modeling that tried to estimate the loss in market value, I believe it was, for the commodities in some form or another because of the president's tariff, the use of tariffs on China and some other countries, and that they were going to back out of that loss analysis to come up with the county rate. Now, what that means and how that gets you to individual county payment is anybody's guess. As Gary mentioned, there's also the potential for a minimal in MFP, and this was announced by the secretary. We don't know how minimal this is going to be, and we don't know exactly what they're going to require in terms of harvesting or foraging. Remember, this is that intersection of using the CCC authority, that they can't make the MFP payment under the authorities they're using unless it's some sort of crop that is marketable, which then obviously conflicts pretty directly with the crop insurance requirements on cover crops. And so how they're going to work that out is going to be an enjoyable legal discussion inside the department before they do so. The other thing I think we want to keep in mind if you're banking on these payments is you will not see the full payment this summer because of a few complications, not the least of which that there is a limit on the amount of money that USDA can use out of the CCC. And that's a $30 billion limit on the borrowing authority of the CCC in any fiscal year. My guess is they're running out of that based on payments made last year under MFP, based on Title I payments and conservation payments. They've got to break this up in 3 tranches. They're also obviously talking about waiting to see what happens with trade negotiations, what happens with planting and prices and other things. So the payments, any estimate in payments, you have to break into 3 parts, one for this summer, one in November, and likely one in early 2020, but it's all contingent on a number of factors at this point. So this is where we get a little crazy. We tried some math. Gary, you'll appreciate this. This is where we try to understand if USDA wanted to create a simple payment that was not commodity-based and that would have no impact on planting decisions, what would that look like? Well, we got $14.5 billion they say they're going to spend, and we know that the acreage amount from last year was $266.5 million. You're not supposed to be able to get payments above the acreage planted in 2018. And so simple lawyer math, that would average to $54.40 per planted acre. Knock off $4 for that minimal, just in case, to keep it on the side. And that's where we get our $50 per planted acre as sort of a baseline for this MFP program. So if they're going to be equitable across all crops and counties, then that might be the way we look at it. And maybe we compare whatever they come up with this $54.40 per acre to see how, in fact, USDA determines it. But that's just one way to look at this. Obviously, this is highly unlikely to be the rate, but you get a sense of what is there and what might be spent. And so where we differ from that was where we start asking questions, I guess. The other component of this, and here again is the legislative text for those that enjoy that sort of thing. That's the MFP program that created by USDA out of existing authorities in the CCC. On top of that, we have this ad hoc disaster assistance that Congress put together. And so what we know is that this ad hoc disaster assistance is for calendar year 2018 and 2019 disasters: Hurricanes Michael and Florence, floods, snowstorms, tornadoes, typhoons, volcanoes, and wildfires, and any other sort of disaster we know of, or hopefully we don't see too many more this year, but that may show up in calendar year 2019. The key to understanding this is that there's only $3.005 billion available from Congress. Because this is supplemental ad hoc disaster assistance, it is a set pot of money that Congress has provided for this use. That means this is a zero-sum game, right? There's no more funds there, and so everything that comes out of this will come out of that 3.5.
Which, by the way, MFP is 14.
So compared to MFP, yeah.
So this is much smaller pot of money going out.
A much smaller pot of money and a finite pot spread over 2 years of disasters. The statutory language indicates that this $3 billion is to be spread across block grants to states for forest restoration. There's our wildfires, for poultry and livestock losses, particularly from the hurricanes, you can imagine. States like North Carolina that flooded out. It is also to be used for tree assistance payments for pecans, which it's above a loss ratio under the tree assistance program TAP that's in the Farm Bill. There's some replacement costs for land lost due to volcanic activity, and a $7 million pot of money out of that $3 billion for whole farm revenue policies in specific states. Again, this is to cover some of the specific disasters, particularly hurricanes. And so you got those two blocks of funds, and then the big question mark out of this $3 billion is that some of this money can be used for crop insurance and NAP to pay up to 90% of the 2018 and 19 losses as determined. It does not say in the statutory language that this is in any way linked directly to prevent planting insurance indemnities. It just says losses, 2018 and 19 losses. So this could be an incredibly large amount of loss, which means it is nearly impossible to see anybody getting up to 90% for prevent plant out of this. I mean, this is $3 billion does not go far enough, even if this were the only item in the entire list, and it's obviously the third in the list. There's also this language that if you didn't buy insurance, you can get up to 70% of the loss. Again, that's not going to happen. I mean, there's just not enough money to cover that. So I think the reality is banking on some bonus crop insurance payment for prevent plant out of this pot of money is probably not the smartest gamble in the world. It's hard to see that there's enough money here to do a whole lot of plussing up of insurance across 2 years and with all the other demands on the money. And I think we have to presume that only in those counties linked to the disasters listed or disasters yet to come will that, and that would be disaster declared counties, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And just also that revenue, it says that revenue policies can use the harvest price in this calculation. So that is to be determined. So another thing we wanted to make sure we understood was just kind of where these counties might be that could receive the ad hoc disasters. And this is not MFP, this is the ad hoc provision from Congress. So we know that there's a couple different disaster type counties. Secretarial disaster has to be requested by the governor, tribal leaders, or FSA state exec. It's been expedited for drought, highly designed for drought to help with drought disasters. And basically you have to have a 30% production loss of at least one crop in the county to get disaster declarations. These are the counties so far as of April 10th that have been declared secretarial disaster counties according to USDA's information on this. For those that are really into the disaster declaration, just kind of note it's a 5-step process, and it's going to take time where they assemble information and they get a better sense of the loss in the area. And our eligible disasters, of course, are all natural disasters, weather events that cause production losses, from storms to blizzards to cold, heat, wind, fire, drought, the whole bit. The map on this side is as of April 3rd. These are the 2018 calendar year disaster counties. These are the ones declared, the primary in red, contiguous in orange. So these are the areas we're looking at under that disaster declaration for the $3 billion in ad hoc. From a presidential standpoint, this is the one we think of often in terms of emergency response to hurricanes or tornadoes. It's declared through FEMA and the Stafford Act within 30 days of an emergency, usually where the state has to say it's beyond its capability to deal with it. So a couple quick examples of presidential disasters in recent here this spring. Here's Iowa as of June 11th and Nebraska. So these are the flooding areas in particular that we've seen presidentially declared this year. So those counties would also be expected to be eligible for that $3 billion shrinking pot of ad hoc disaster assistance. And with that, I think we've exhausted the information we have at this time, and we're happy to take some questions and any feedback or concerns you all have out there in the listening area.
So we got a couple of questions, and I'll read the first one, and this is a Todd Hubbs question. What is the point of publishing a weekly ratio where the numerator and denominator change each week, as is the case in the crop progress report? So, Todd?
Well, that's indeed, that's a tough one. In a normal year, it helps us to get an idea of how the crop is progressing and sort of sets up USDA for their emerged and starting the conditions reports. This is a very abnormal year. I will say, we've seen the USDA says 92% of the corn crop's been planted. I think the last couple of weeks there have been a substantial amount of prevent plant acres included in those calculations. I'm using a base of between 3 and 5% less than the 92%. And I think any kind of changes you see moving forward, you can probably assume most of that is prevent plant. So what is the point? This year, it doesn't look like a good idea, but in a normal year, even just a slightly abnormal year, it's helpful.
So does grain sorghum make sense? And here, I am assuming this question, you're thinking about planting grain sorghum rather than corn and soybeans, and I'll further assume it's southern Illinois. I do not know if you planted grain sorghum now, what sort of yield response you would get to it. So that's key to that, and I don't know that answer. I'm looking at either one of my two colleagues here, and they're not chiming in anything at this point. I do understand the why you would be thinking about it. So if you're confident that you can get some yield from it, grain sorghum prices are likely to be following corn up. So if you could get, but I don't know if you can plant grain sorghum now and get any sort of what your expectations on yield would be.
Yeah, and I think there's other practical considerations, right? If you're not set up to handle grain sorghum, you've got nowhere to ship it, send it, sell it, there's going to be a lot that goes into that decision. And I would think that at least for Illinois, that's a pretty focused area where that would even be a decision.
Yeah. Could we see 8 to 10 million acres of corn in prevent plant, 2 to 3 million acres in soybeans? When do you start focusing on national yield closer to 160 versus USDA's 166? And that would be a corn yield. USDA is using 166 now, and go down to 160.
So I believe we're going to see prevent plant acres in the 10 million acre range. I think you could see between 2 and 3 million acres of soybean prevent plant. The question is how much soybean switching has gone on over the last month or so from other crops to soybeans. I said earlier, I think it might be close to a wash. That could be wrong, but that's how I feel about it. when should we start thinking about, well, when should the USDA or us in general start thinking about lowering the yield? You can do it right now if you want to. I find in my models when I get into mid-July and we start seeing the crop, and then the crop conditions aren't perfect, but I think you'll probably see USDA start ratcheting them down in the August if we're having a bad summer. Just follow us on Farmdoc. I guarantee you we'll be talking about it in real time, but sometime in mid-July is when I really start. Right now, we got so much corn late planted. The conditions don't really mean anything. Who knows what's out there? And a lot of corn's been planted in some very bad conditions. And my expectation is the yield will probably drift lower. I saw another question. Somebody's asking to do a scenario of a 135 bushel an acre corn yield due to an early frost. Is it feasible? Sure, it is feasible. That will be an absolute disaster. And who knows where corn prices will go and what kind of demand destruction we'll see out of that.
So I suppose the case of 2009, we had a lot of late planting corn and a reasonably good yield. So weather from conditions from this time on.
I'm not ready to start fading the yield too much right now.
Is that just, is the wisdom in slowly moving that so you don't completely have to back up again, right? If you drop too far too fast and conditions improve.
I don't know what Wazzy thinks when they're doing it.
Right.
I just know what I do, and we'll see. I think with these cool temperatures, corn's gone in it. We're well behind in Illinois in growing degree days. You could feasibly see some of this crop not going black layer at all, or in November. For the folks out there that planted corn late, we could get in a situation where you're not getting it out of the field. You're going to miss another fall field work scenario, put yourself behind the 8 ball for next year's possible huge corn acreage if we see the kind of supply shock that we're thinking we're going to see. So you might want to keep that in mind. Plus, the drying cost could be astronomical. I know there's been a lot of talk about 40, 40, 40 corn this year. I'm more talking about 140, 40, 40. It could get ugly. And I'm not ready to start fading the yield hard yet. We'll see in another month, I think.
So the question is, are receipts for seed corn required to take prevent plant payment for corn? In other words, I was on the fence to plant corn or soybeans based on market conditions and hand plant seed corn for land. So if you take a prevent plant payment, you're going to have to provide some form of indication of planting corn. Seed receipts is one of those documentation. Other documentation would be field records. If you follow a 50-50 corn soybean rotation, then that would be a sort of an indication as well of the number of acres. So no, it's not specifically required. In fact, the Prevent Plant Book doesn't list those requirements, but some sort of documentation is going to be required for intentions. I guess if you're taking 100% of your acres as corn prevent plant, expect a lot of questions. And go down from there. Our next question, how much damage can the wet weather do to the soybean yield? Do you see any year similar to this? And then Todd will answer this, but I would note that wet feet are not good for soybeans. So phytophthora, root rot, and a whole host of things come into being when you have wet feet. We're planting in wet conditions. So yeah, there are real concerns there about yields.
No, that's true. And you really got to go back in time to get comparable years to this kind of scenario. We've had pretty benign weather for the most part for the last 20 years. And I think the wet weather is going to impact soybean yield? Yes, I do. As you can see from my balance sheets, I've already started to take yield off the soybeans, and I ran through those scenarios. 43 is not out of the question. in my opinion, particularly with the amount of soybeans that are going in basically like double crop. But yeah, I think, Gary, your slide, and I don't know if we can put it back up there, we're showing the yield breakdown from double crop beans. It's not good.
Now to answer a couple of quick questions. NAP, NAP stands for the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program, created by the 96 Farm Bill. Basically, if your crop does not have insurance in your county, you can get a NAP payment. The question about rye in the MFP program, I'm double checking the release. Rye is not included in the list of crops, so I will adjust that information. In the list of crops released in the May 23rd report, rye is not listed as an MFP crop. So keep that in mind. Thanks for the question to get that clarified.
So rye, by the way, would be a cover crop.
It would be a cover crop. It would be a cover crop, but it still does stand in this unknown space between having to harvest or forage it and how it fits with crop insurance requirements. So again, be real careful. Make sure you check with your crop insurance first. One more MFP question. Well, Gary, did you find what you needed? Is it safe to assume county MFP payment would be based on your physical location county and not your administrative county? Yes, I believe that is probably a safe assumption. That was fixed. That was a problem with 2014 ARC County issues. It should not. The administrative county should not control that payment. That should be the county of physical location. But again, the caveat being we haven't gotten full details from USDA on that.
Did you want to say more about the yields?
No, I thought it'd be good to put it up there. We're just independent of wet conditions. We're putting a substantial amount of the crop in for soybeans and reduced yield potential.
So we got a question here. What can be used for cover crops? Sudan grass is the question mark. RMA does not have a list of approved cover crops, so it relates on good farming practices. My guess is that Sudan grass would meet good farming practices as a cover crop. So RMA does not have a list of approved cover crops. If we're talking about crop insurance items, if Sudan grass, if that's a MFP minimal payment, we have no clue if that means.
We don't. Gary's right. We don't have a list of approved cover crops. There is a key thing to keep in mind that the 2018 Farm Bill did push RMA to be far more favorable to the farmer in cover crop decisions around good farming practices and the definitions and terminations around that. So that, we would hold out some optimism that RMA will be favorable as possible under the law that they can for cover crop decisions.
So farmers declare their prevent plant to crop insurer. To what extent are these declarations accessible by the public? So, all right. So this is we will know the total number of acres by county that are declared prevent plant, but that number is not going to be known anytime soon. So if you're looking for a number, it's not going to happen anytime soon. The most likely way this will unfold is that farmers will complete their acreage report to crop insurance on July 15th. And that will include prevent plant numbers. Then the crop insurers themselves will have time to summarize that. That could be 15 to 30 days. That will go to RMA. RMA will summarize that, and giving all of that timeline, the earliest that you could expect any sort of condition would be end of August, and it might be later than that. So,
given the sheer amount, those things are likely to be delayed this year.
I know. All right. When a farmer signs up for PLC SCL intent at FSA, will he get an option to take PLC payment? Or all right, so we have a question relative to SCL and PLC. So if a farmer signed up for SCO this year, to be eligible for SCO, you had to sign up for PLC, or you.
You're gonna have to. That sign up hasn't happened yet.
That hasn't happened yet. So, typical year, SCO is only eligible for PLC. This year, we don't know what farmers' 2019 decisions are. So SCO took SCO on the July 15th report to Farm Service Agency. You will have to one of the acreage reports, you'll have to indicate you intend to take PLC. And if you want to keep your SCO coverage, you will indicate you intend to take PLC.
Right.
That decision does not bind what you do with your ARC PLC decision. And my guess is FSA is working pretty hard right now, and I don't know when they're ever going to come up with the sign up for ARC PLC. But at the earliest, it will be starting September 1, and it will last for a while.
Right, to make that PLC ARC decision.
Yes.
You cannot get ARC and PLC on the same crop on the same farm, and you can't get ARC County and SCO on that same crop.
So
those are the limitations we know from statute and past regs. Final details are still to be determined by.
So we'll for our next webinar, we will put together a couple slides telling you what we know about the SCO decision.
And this IRS question has been up there for a while, asking if IRS allows producers to defer prevent plant payments because they are based on bushels that they would have sold in 2020. How can the USDA say that prevent plant acres aren't a marketable commodity and not MFP payments? So look, again, this is the point where we say that the MFP program is something USDA created wholly out of existing authority. So they have to stay within certain bounds of what that authority is. So IRS has no determination on this. What's determining MFP is the way that the lawyers at OGC and the Office of Management and Budget in the administration are reading the statutory requirements, and they read it as requiring a marketable commodity produced to market, not a prevent plant. And so that, the IRS definitions and determinations are not going to hold sway given the fact that this is something USDA has created out of its own existing authorities.
So we appreciate your time here today. We thank you for being on our webinar, and we will be doing one more webinar on this next Wednesday. So we'll tell you what we don't know then. And with this webinar will be up on our Farmdoc website by tomorrow. So thank you for being part of this webinar.